Hey guys, welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. For those of you that don't already know me, my name is Brittany, and if you're new here, feel free to leave a like, drop a comment, consider subscribing, because it'd be really cool and it'd help me out quite a lot. Don't be afraid to hit that little notification bell, get notified every single time that I post, because it is very rarely, if ever. I don't got much spoons, and I'm busy. Yeah. I've got 2 kids. One of them is 2, and the other one's like 9 months old now, and I have a whole bunch of chronic health issues that did not come to light until after I had them. So if you're more interested in learning about that, check out my previous video. I made a video about how pregnancy pretty much disabled me. I had a whole bunch of underlying health conditions that I was not aware of until after I became pregnant. And really, pregnancy and then into postpartum is when they just started whooping my ass, basically. If you're interested in learning more about these conditions and easier to digest, shorter videos, check me out on TikTok. Pretty much my whole TikTok, besides occasional gardening videos, is mostly to do with my trauma and my chronic illnesses. Check out my TikTok for shorter videos on that, but here are my longer videos on the subject matter. So postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome is also known as POTS for short, P-O-T-S. I always had symptoms of POTS, but they never became much of an issue in my life until after I became pregnant and then into postpartum as well. The first time I can recall having a POTS episode was when I was in pretty much, I would say, middle school, around 6th grade. I was just chilling with my little boyfriend at the time in the public library where our little field trip was, and I stood up. You know, we were just sitting on the floor in between, like, you know, the book aisles. I stood up, and I almost passed out, so I had to grab on to the what's it called? I had to grab onto the bookshelf and like brace myself. And he was like, "Are you okay?" I was like, "Yeah, I just stood up too fast. It happens sometimes." He's like, "Do you think you have POTS?" And I was like, you know, back then I'm in 6th grade. I don't know what any of that is. So basically, at the time, he tried explaining to me what POTS was. And it's really uncommon for males or men to be diagnosed with POTS and to have POTS. It's more commonly found in like females. So, you know, he pretty much tried explaining it to me, but it kind of went in one ear out the other, because it didn't really like affect me that much. It was like I'd stand up, get kind of dizzy, brush it off, or keep walking through it. And that's pretty much how life would be. I passed out maybe 3 or 4 times throughout my life, and I always was just like, you know, my grandpa's diabetic, so he was like, "Oh, maybe your blood sugar was just a little bit low because maybe you just didn't eat enough or whatever. Maybe it's been too long in between meals." Like, first of all, normal people don't pass out by going, if, you know, normal people don't have, you know, I'm not a diabetic, but anyway. So yeah, my whole life pretty much just brushed it off as normal. Pretty much just gaslit myself, you know. Just girly things. So fast forward years and years and years, I turn 19 and I get pregnant, and I start like going to my appointments and stuff, and they keep sending me to the ER to get EKGs done and stuff because I have tachycardia. And they're just like, "Oh, we can't find anything, you know, your EKGs are normal." So throughout my pregnancy, I just kind of they'd keep doing the EKGs. They're like, "Since you're tachycardic, we have to do it just to make sure you're not having a heart attack or anything, but we don't know why you're tachycardic." And they never dug deeper into it. Like, I'm a 19-year-old girl with a resting heart rate of 108 beats per minute, and y'all aren't gonna do any investigating besides some EKGs. Alright. So fast forward about 2 more years, maybe more, like 1 year. So I was postpartum with my first, and I was trying to sell plasma. Because, you know, I'm a stay-at-home mom, college student, I'm disabled, I'm trying to make a little bit extra money, my health is just getting worse and worse, can't understand why, and so I start selling plasma. And then my health gets even worse, which I didn't even think was possible. So I start getting deferred, like after maybe 4 times giving plasma, and they keep deferring me because the tachycardia is back, only it's worse. Like, normally I could sit there for a while with the pulse ox on, and after a few minutes, like, my heart rate would go back to normal, or at least below 100 beats per minute. But it wasn't. So I got really frustrated, because I was like, look, I can't even, like, donate plasma, I can't donate blood, I can't do anything because they keep deferring me because my heart is so tachycardic. Like, there's something wrong. So I go to my primary care and I express these frustrations and these concerns, and they're like, "Okay, we'll refer you to a cardiologist finally." So I go to the cardiologist, and I pretty much described, like, yeah, I guess, like, I feel tired pretty much all the time. I stand up and I get really, really dizzy. I even sometimes just sitting up, if I stretch like a certain way, like, all my vision will start to fade black from the outside in. I'll get really lightheaded. Sometimes my face will go numb and start tingling. Like, My fingers and toes will be really cold. Sometimes my legs will feel like lead is in my legs, and they'll get really hot and red, like, to the touch. Or they'll get really red and hot to the touch. And I was just, like, you know, listing all these pretty non-specific symptoms, like, because he asked me, he was like, do you have anything else besides tachycardia? Like, how have you been feeling lately? I was like, well, now that I think of it, like, I started listing all of these issues that I've been having. He's like, have you ever heard of something called POTS, like postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome? And I was like, yeah, I have. Why do you think that's, like, a possibility? And he was like, I'd like to just test you for it really quick. He pretty much said, so usually POTS is diagnosed with what's called a tilt table test. So it looks pretty medieval, like a medieval torture device in a way. So they sort of strap you down, and then they attach a whole bunch of, like, leads and stuff, sort of like an EKG in a way. And then they'll have you laying on the table, and then they'll sit you upright, and they basically want to, like, force you to pass out. Like, if you have POTS, a lot of people will say that in the tilt table test, they'll put you upright and basically, like, keep you there, and they'll tell you to not fight the passing out. Because most people with POTS, they're able to, like, you're able to fight it a lot of the time. Like, you'll stand up or you'll change positions and everything will start fading black, but most people can power through it. Like, it's usually pretty rare, from what I've been hearing from other POTS patients, for us to actually fully pass out. Like, usually that's if, you know, you're really, really down bad in flare, you're not keeping up with your fluids and your salt, or you're very sick, you know, you've got something else going on, which is just amplifying your POTS. But otherwise, yeah, no, it's not really typical to pass out, but for the tilt table test, they, like, encourage it because they want to see, I guess, your limits. But anyway, luckily I skipped all that mess. My cardiologist had me lay down on the exam table. He took my blood pressure, he took my heart rate, and then he had me sit up. And so then I sat up, and then he took it again, and my heart rate increased by, like, 50 beats per minute. It went from, like, you know, I think it was, like, 70, and it went up to, like, 120 or something like that, 130. Yeah, and he said the diagnostic criteria to be diagnosed with POTS is for an increase of 30 beats per minute or higher with your heart rate upon changing, you know, position like that. And mine went, like, 50 beats per minute or higher. So I got diagnosed. Luckily, I got to skip the tilt table test. He's like, yeah, no, you've got POTS. Like, I don't even need a tilt table test. Like, your heart rate just skyrocketed just from laying on the exam table to standing up within, like, the 2 seconds that happened, you know? So that's how I got diagnosed. That is pretty much all the signs and symptoms that led up to it. Again, most people tend to have a hard time getting diagnosed because they're pretty non-specific symptoms besides obviously, like, passing out and, like, tachycardia. But I mean, lethargy, I mean, like, you know, getting kind of dizzy, lightheaded, maybe some vertigo, like, getting headaches, having some light sensitivity, having some nausea, some vomit, like, mild vomiting, like, they're all so non-specific. Like, if you think about those symptoms, they could be literally everything. You know, they could be anything, or they could just be nothing at all and something temporary. Which is what makes POTS, like, underdiagnosed and kind of hard for them to diagnose. But definitely, if you have any sort of concerns, if you experience these symptoms, I would definitely recommend looking into a cardiologist. Now, with POTS, and the issue with these symptoms is they can be mistaken for other conditions, because postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome is a form of dysautonomia, which means it is a form of dysfunction of the nervous system, your autonomic nervous system. Now, your autonomic nervous system controls everything. So they call it your autonomic nervous system because it's, like, automatic. When you hear autonomic nervous system, you can sort of think automatic nervous system. So everything that you don't have to think about doing. So breathing, blinking, regulating your body temperature. I mean, everything that you don't have to really do, your body just does for you. Digestion, all of that is controlled by your autonomic nervous system because they're autonomic, they're automatic bodily functions. Now, with POTS, I have a dysfunction of said nervous system, meaning all of the functions are going to be thrown out of whack. So I have issues regulating my body temperature. I will be very hot, sweaty, and then suddenly I'll be freezing cold, goosebumps all over, I need a sweater. And then the next moment, like, one moment I'll be having diarrhea, and then I'll have, like, constipation, and then I'll be completely normal. Like, all of my automatic bodily functions are just out of whack. Out of whack. I mean, everything you can think of is just fucking out of whack. So people tend to think that, like, oh, well, POTS, you could just use a wheelchair, or you know, just don't stand as much, take your time with standing, you know, get on beta blockers. Like, the issue with beta blockers is people like me who have asthma can't take them, because I've tried the one, I think it was like labetalol or there was one of them where it was supposed to be better for asthma and not affect your breathing, and it still didn't work. I still struggled to breathe with it. So beta blockers are not an option for all people, and with wheelchairs, you know, I mean, they're not an option for all people. They're not accessible in many cases. They're not always affordable. They're not always accessible, you know. So there are a lot of things that people will be like, a lot of people unfortunately will try to downplay POTS and be like, oh, there's so many things nowadays you can do. Like, yeah, there's no cure, but at least you can do this, that, and the other. And it's like, that's still not applicable to everybody. That's still not, you know, feasible for everybody. It's still not an option for everybody. And that's not to say, like, also, POTS doesn't affect everybody the same. There are some people with POTS, and they're like gymnasts. They're like marathon runners. I was a gymnast for 10 years. I've had POTS my whole life. It just didn't become an issue until after I became pregnant and had all those health issues from the pregnancy brought to light. So you can be very physically fit. You can have a normal, healthy life with POTS, but you also cannot, you know. And some people with POTS, they'll have like sort of times where they go into what they call like remission of sorts, where they just won't have any symptoms. It's like their POTS almost was cured, like it magically went away. And then maybe weeks, months, years down the line, it hits them like a ton of bricks all over again. Yeah, that is pretty much POTS. That is like a rundown of all of the more basic need-to-know things of POTS. Besides that, though, there's also the other things that they recommend is increasing your sodium intake, increasing like your electrolytes, which includes sodium, but of course your potassium, everything else. They recommend compression socks. These are kind of big on me. Yeah, I've got these like compression socks, even things like corsets, so like compression garments. It really helps like keep basically keep your blood circulation, keep your blood flowing where it should be. The issue with that is there's different subtypes of POTS. So I can hopefully insert a picture here. If not, I'm gonna make a separate video going into detail on all the different subtypes of POTS. But for instance, there is what I have, which is hypovolemic POTS. So hypovolemic POTS, hypo meaning low, volemic meaning volume. So I have low volume of blood in my body. That's part of what causes my POTS. So I also have a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which can cause POTS, but my POTS the POTS that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome caused me is hypovolemic POTS. So basically I have low blood volume. Yeah, basically the issue with a lot of the recommendations for care for POTS is that there's different subtypes of POTS, so then the care standards are different for the different subtypes of POTS. A lot of them are the same, you know, in terms of like sodium a lot of the time, and like regulating your electrolytes and your fluid intake and compression socks and things like that, but there are different, very different specific like needs for the different subtypes of POTS, which I'll make a separate video on, because again, I don't want these videos to be too long each. Yeah, my only options, since I can't take beta blockers because of my asthma and other health conditions, my only options are just monitoring my sodium, which is a lot easier said than done. Monitoring all my other electrolytes, also a lot easier said than done. Monitoring my fluid intake, a lot easier said than done. Compression stocks, compression garments, so like corsets, you know, like anything that keeps my blood volume from dropping down to my legs as much whenever I stand up. Because for me, being hypovolemic POTS, that's my main issue, is I don't have enough blood. So when I stand up or I sit up, all the blood leaves my head. So that losing my vision, like where my vision goes black, I feel really, really hot, I feel really heavy, I feel like I'm about to pass out, that pre-syncope, that's what that's called, but like the feeling like you're gonna pass out without or before passing out, that is because my brain is being deprived of oxygen in blood. So when I stand up, all that blood is dropping to my legs because my body is not able to prevent that from happening and pumping the blood back up to my brain. So then I experience the symptoms of blood loss to my brain. And that can cause me to pass out and lose consciousness because of the lack of oxygen and blood going to my brain. And there's no cure, no treatment, besides the medications that I cannot take. So here I am, just raw dogging this shit. That is basically a rundown of my POTS, you know, my experiences with it, my personal symptoms, how it affects me, my specific subtype of POTS. Again, This condition affects like thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, and it affects them all differently because there are different subtypes of POTS. Some people are able to take medications. Some people, you know, things like compression garments, they work better for some people than others. There's just so many factors. So if you know somebody who has POTS or thinks they have POTS and they're just fine, and then you know someone else who has POTS and they're in a wheelchair, they're both completely valid. They're both completely valid because they're both affected completely differently by the same illness. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Again, I will be making my next video most likely on the different subtypes of POTS and going deeper into POTS information and education. So if you're more interested in learning about my chronic illnesses and disabilities, don't be afraid to hit that notification bell to get notified every single time that I post, because it is very rarely, I don't really have many spoons to be making content anymore. But I'm gonna try because it needs more awareness. On TikTok, you can find more of my disability content, and it's a lot shorter, quicker, easier to digest. And with TikTok, I did notice it's just a lot more saturated. Like, disability content is heavily saturated, but there's not enough representation here on YouTube. So here I am bringing the disability content and awareness over to YouTube, and I hope y'all enjoy. Leave a like, drop a comment, consider subscribing because it'd be really cool and it'd help me out quite a lot. And remember, if you can't be good, but you better be good at it. I love y'all.